During a flower viewing banquet, Zhang was attacked. To protect his widowed sister-in-law, he pushed me in front of her to block the knife. The blade missed her heart by just 2 inches, and I nearly lost my life. Afterward, when I confronted him, he coldly explained, "My sister-in-law is pregnant. The child in her womb is the last bloodline of my eldest brother. As the future wife of the Zhang family, shouldn't you protect the eldest grandson?" Later, Zhang was rewarded for his achievements in flood control. He requested to marry his elder sister-in-law as a secondary wife, citing his unwillingness to let his young nephew lose his mother. The emperor praised his kindness and readily approved the request. Zhang joyfully received the imperial decree, only to find the words first wife clearly written at the top. The emperor smiled lightly. "Minister Zhang, your actions are the height of kindness. How could marrying a concubine be considered a violation of etiquette and subject you to criticism from the world? The Wen family's daughter has already been sent to my irresponsible elder brother. You may now marry your elder sister-in-law with dignity and love her as your wife." I was seriously injured and remained unconscious for several months before waking up. During that time, Zhang did not show his face once. Yushan said that the wife of the heir to the Marquis of Xianyang had suffered a miscarriage at a flower viewing banquet. Zhang was worried about his sister-in-law's unborn child. He had been on leave from work to stay at home with her. My heart was filled with bitterness, but I could not bring myself to complain. After all, Zhang has always placed Shinjuin above everything else. She is his elder sister-in-law and the childhood sweetheart who grew up with him. When the Xianyang crown prince was still alive, the relationship between the uncle and niece-in-law was extremely harmonious. After the crown prince passed away, Shinjuin was left with his posthumous child, while Zhang shouldered the family's responsibilities. He grew even more cherishing of Shinjuin. Therefore, whenever there was the slightest discord between me and Shinjuin, Zhang always sided with her. Even on that day at the banquet when the assassin attacked with a knife, his first reaction was to push me away from Shinjuin. Thinking of this, the wound on my chest began to throb painfully. Yushan noticed the weariness in my brows and assumed I was sad. She fetched a makeup box from the vanity and comforted me. "Miss, please do not be sad. Although the second young master did not come in person, he is thinking of you. This entire set of jade ornaments was sent by him to win your favor." I glanced through it briefly. Inside were 12 exquisitely crafted ornaments, neatly arranged. How familiar they looked. A year ago, I had paid a deposit for a set of ornaments at a jewelry shop. The next morning, the shop returned them to me exactly as they were. It was because Shinjuin had also set her sights on that set of jewelry, and Zhang had outbid me with 3 times the price. At the time, I still harbored hopes for him, so I persistently asked the shopkeeper if he had informed Zhang that the set had already been reserved by Wen Duan, the young miss of the Wen family. The shopkeeper looked at me awkwardly and said, "I did inform him, but the second young master, upon hearing that the set of jewelry was reserved by you, immediately offered a higher price." I don't recall my exact feelings at the time, but I remember having a heated argument with Zhang afterward. He calmly endured my accusations, watching me grow increasingly angry. Finally, he said, "Wen Duan, causing such a commotion over a few pieces of jewelry, don't you think that makes you look ridiculous? Now this set of jewelry is back in my hands, but it is the reward I received for taking the knife meant for Shinjuin." How ridiculous. I didn't look at the jewelry again and said in a deep voice, "Throw it away. From now on, don't accept anything he sends." Zhang and I were betrothed by accident. 3 years ago, I was invited by Princess Minghua to attend a polo tournament, where I faced Zhang, whom I had never met before. At the time, I had only recently arrived in the capital and was still unfamiliar with the ways of the world. My teammates all held back, but I gave it my all in the match. Zhang had no intention of taking it seriously, but seeing how desperately I was fighting, He grew competitive. Although we were defeated in the end, I won the favor of the Grand Princess. She said that Song Zhang reminded her of herself and her husband when they were young. She immediately asked the Marquis of Xianyang if he would consider a marriage between our families. At that time, my father was still a junior official in the Ministry of Revenue, so a marriage with the Marquis's mansion was truly a blessing from heaven. The Marquis of Xianyang's reaction was indifferent. As the second son, Song Zhang was neither the heir apparent nor burdened with the responsibility of inheriting the title. Xianyang Marquis did not give a clear answer but instead sought Song Zhang's opinion. To be honest, I could be considered somewhat attractive. However, in the capital city, where beautiful women abound, it was unlikely that I would catch the eye of a nobleman. Yet Song Zhang only paused briefly before thanking the Grand Princess. After that, we often visited each other and were deeply in love for a time. I had always believed that Song Zhang also harbored some affection for me. After all, as long as it did not involve Shinjuan, he was no different from an ordinary fiancé. But I never imagined that he would not only take his side in our harmless arguments, but that he would go so far as to nearly cost me my life. I discarded all the letters and items I had exchanged with Song Zhang over the past 3 years. Then, dragging my newly healed body, I went to find my father. To my surprise, he had been sent to Lizhou last month and would not return to the capital until the end of next month. My stepmother Luo heard this and summoned me to her room. In recent days, people had heard the commotion at the bamboo garden and seen things being thrown out. Anyone with eyes could tell that the eldest Miss Wen had argued with Song Er again. Luo sure had always looked down on me and rarely interacted with me. It was only after I had climbed onto Song Zhang's high branch that she deigned to look at me. Now she thought I was angry with Song Zhang, so she immediately tried to reconcile us. But I said break off the engagement. Are you crazy? The Marquis of Xianyang's mansion is such a prestigious family. How many people would kill to marry into it? And you want to break off the engagement? Luo stared at me in disbelief, as if I had committed a heinous crime. Song Zhang pushed me in front of a knife and almost got me killed. How can you ask me to marry him and risk my life again? Upon hearing this, Lady Luo's expression froze. On the day Prince Chong'an hosted a banquet at the mansion to admire the flowers, Lady Luo was unable to attend due to her young son's illness. So she only knew about the assassination attempt and was unaware of the details. However, after a moment of astonishment, she dismissed it, saying, "It's not that serious. He must have acted impulsively in his panic. Besides, you're not dead, are you?" She urged me. After this incident, Song Ergongzi must feel guilty toward you. He will compensate you in time. Such a good husband, don't be foolish. If the lady says he's good, dare you go to the Buddha's altar and pray that Injin will also marry such a good man in the future? At these words, Luo Shi's expression changed instantly. I continued. If the lady truly goes to pray to the Buddha to grant Injin a husband of Song Zhang's character, I will obediently wait for marriage and never mention the word divorce again. Anjin was only 6 years old. And Mrs. Luo treated him like the apple of her eye, cherishing him dearly. She was so eager for me to marry into the Marquis's mansion because she hoped that it would raise her daughter's status in the future, giving her a chance to find a husband from a wealthy family. You stubborn child. If you don't want to marry, then don't. Why drag your sister into this? Luo Shi, feeling guilty, changed the subject. I have no say in the matter of breaking off the engagement. This marriage was arranged by the Grand Princess. If you wish to call it off, you must go and beg her to revoke her decision. Ignore her cold tone. This is indeed the most direct solution at the moment. But as the daughter of a mere 5th-rank official, how could I possibly have the qualifications to meet such imperial relatives and nobles? Moreover, the Grand Princess has been ill for a long time, secluded in the palace, and even Princess Minghua rarely gets to see her. For now, I can only wait for my father to return and submit a petition to the emperor. That night, I wrote a letter and sent it to Liz Ho. In the letter, I detailed the circumstances of my injury at the flower viewing banquet and made it clear that I was determined to call off the engagement. In the days that followed, I tended to my injuries while waiting for my father's reply. The Luo family, seeing that I was determined to call off the engagement, resumed their former contempt. They claimed that I should eat light meals due to my injuries and ordered the kitchen to serve only plain porridge and simple dishes. With no other option, I had to use my own savings to arrange for a private meal at Tingzhu Garden. One day, Yushan returned from the inn in a hurry. She said mysteriously, "Miss, something big has happened at the Marquis's mansion. Could it be that an assassin stabbed Song Zhang? And he died before the doctor could arrive because his injuries were too severe?" "Of course not. How could you think that? That would be a shame," Yushuan muttered for a while before explaining to me. "Yesterday, the second young master Song and the crown prince's wife went out together. But they got separated on the way. The crown prince's wife accidentally tripped and fell. She already had an unstable pregnancy. And after this incident, her chances of survival are slim. All the famous doctors and midwives in the capital have been summoned to the Marquis's mansion to await orders." Yushan's tone grew resentful. The second young master was so distraught over this that he panicked and rushed to the emperor to request that all the imperial physicians be summoned to the mansion. When the young lady was clinging to life, he didn't show this much concern, not even bothering to visit. No wonder the young lady wants to call off the engagement. I no longer care about such things. I just find it a bit odd. During the flower viewing gathering, Shinjuyin was 4 months pregnant. Now, 3 months have passed, and it is the time when she should be resting quietly. Why would she go to such a crowded gathering? Fortunately, Shinjuin's child was saved in the end. It has been half a month since I sent the letter, but there is still no news from my father. I wanted to write another letter, but the Luo family suddenly sent someone to summon me. The old nurse hurried in and ordered the servants, "Quickly dress the young lady and apply more powder to cover her sickly complexion. Second young master Song is waiting in the front hall." Ever since I decided to break off the engagement, I have become increasingly calm. All my past grievances now seem insignificant. I thought I would be able to remain calm when I faced Song Zhang. But the moment I saw him, I couldn't help but grab the teacup nearby and throw it at him. The porcelain cup shattered on the ground, and blood immediately gushed from Song Zhang's forehead. "Dong Yang, have you lost your mind?" Luo Shi, standing nearby, screamed and jumped to her feet, her face ashen, repeatedly calling for someone to fetch a doctor. Song Zhang, tall and elegant, did not dodge. He merely waved his hand to indicate that he was fine, then slowly took out a handkerchief to wipe the blood from his forehead. "Wen Qiong, how dare you strike your fiancé? When did the Wen family teach you such behavior?" "I was just following your example." I raised my eyes to look directly at Song Zhang and said sarcastically, "So this is not allowed?" Seeing my sarcastic words, Luo Shi was both shocked and disgusted. Today, Song Zhang came to visit, and she had planned to use this opportunity to smooth things over. She had even specially instructed the old maid to dress me up. She never expected me to come and take revenge. Song Zhang spoke softly to smooth things over. "Donger has been ill and overly worried. I delayed visiting her, so she has some resentment. It's understandable." "Oh my. Second young master. How broad-minded you are. It is all my fault as a stepmother for failing to educate her properly. I beg you to. I have not seen Shirer for many days. May the lady allow us to speak alone?" Song Zhang interrupted her. Luo Shi's words were cut off, leaving her feeling extremely embarrassed. Before leaving, she glared at me fiercely. The main hall was now empty except for me and Song Zhang. I felt there was nothing more to say and turned to leave. "Are you still angry?" Song Zhang's brows furrowed with an inexplicable hint of grievance. Do you know that no one has ever dared to harm me in the slightest since I was a child? The implication was that he had stood there allowing me to strike him, which was already a great favor. No one has ever harmed my life either. I suppressed my anger. If you wanted to protect Shinjuan, you should have stepped in yourself. Why push me into danger? Don't tell me it was an accident. Everyone saw how dangerous it was. You never intended to let me live. Song Zhang furrowed his brows, his tone turning cold. Don't speak so harshly. Ayin is pregnant with my eldest brother's only heir. You should know how important this child is to the Song family. Moreover, as the future wife of the Song family, isn't it your duty to protect the eldest son? Looking at Song Zhang's self-righteous expression, I was at a loss for words. Seeing my silence, Song Zhang sighed softly and spoke again with a softer tone. I didn't think this through. If you still have any grievances in the future, feel free to vent them. But I didn't come here today to argue with you. He continued. The emperor has ordered me to go to Qianzhou to deal with the floods. Ying's pregnancy is still unstable, and I will be gone for a long time. I hope you can visit the Marquis's mansion often to look after her for me. Song Zhang, you are a piece of trash. Before he could finish, I had already raised my hand and slapped him across the face. Always like this. Why is it always like this? Every time I try to calmly handle our arguments, I end up being pushed to the brink of losing control. Song Zhang was eerily calm as he looked down at me indifferently. Wendong, I like your stubborn nature, but I hope you understand that you are destined to become the princess consort. Continuing to act so recklessly will only lead to a tragic end. What kind of end could be worse than this? I screamed, losing control. Song Zhang, I will never marry you. And I don't need your so-called love. The air froze. Song Zhang's expressionless eyes grew colder by the second. Is that so? You still haven't given up. He curved his lips into a cold smile and took an envelope from his sleeve. This letter was addressed to Liz Ho. But your stepmother intercepted it at the post office and handed it to me. Song Zhang's eyes revealed a hint of pity, as if he were looking at a prey struggling in vain. You silly girl. You actually thought you could convince Minister Wen to break off the marriage? Have you forgotten that our marriage was sealed by the words of the Grand Princess herself? I retorted. According to the laws of our dynasty, if one party commits a serious crime before marriage, the other party has the right to break off the engagement, even if the imperial marriage decree is different. The current emperor is merciful. If we can explain the circumstances and appeal to his emotions, it might still be possible. Serious crime? What crime have I committed? You deliberately pushed me to block the knife. That was premeditated murder. Song Zhang stared at me, a hint of interest flickering in his eyes. You may not know this, but on that day, the assassin aimed his knife at Ayin because Prince Chong'an happened to be behind her. At the time, the scene was chaotic, and aside from Ayin and me, no one knew why you were injured. During the time you were recovering, Prince Chong'an suspected why the injured person was you, who was so far from him. I explained that you had risked your life to protect the prince by stepping in front of the blade. After speaking, he reached out to touch my hairpin, since no one witnessed it, and I earned you a reputation for selflessly saving your lord. What crime have I committed? I felt as though I had been plunged into an ice cave, once again experiencing the despair of being pushed toward a blade with no way to escape. But Wen Dian, even if I didn't meddle with fate, this marriage would still be impossible for you to refuse. Song Zhang pressed forward step by step. The marriage was arranged by imperial relatives, and the alliance is between noble families. What stands before you is neither morality nor law. He leaned in close and whispered in my ear. But royal power. I gasped, my fingertips digging deeply into the palm of my hand. Song Zhang tilted his neck slightly, admiring the blood draining from my face. After a moment, he changed the subject. I hear you lost the jade headpiece I gave you? That was something I had a craftsman remake specifically for you, it was not an old item. I suppose you refuse to forgive me because you don't want to share something with another. His gaze fell on my knuckles, white from clenching my fists. With extreme patience, he prized them open one by one. Then, he placed a smooth, hard object into my palm. This is a jade pendant I carved myself. There is only one in the world, and I give it to you alone. Song Zhang's handsome brows curved upward, his expression gentle yet condescending. Are you satisfied now? He rubbed my cheek with his fingertips, his tone flat but unquestionable. Sure. This is the first time I've hurt you. And it will be the last. Stay in the mansion and wait for your wedding. Once I've finished my work on the river, my elder brother will have completed his mourning period, and I'll immediately bring you into the family. I stood stiffly before him, speechless, letting him do as he pleased. After a moment, I laughed bitterly. Song Zhang, you only ever saw me as a toy, didn't you? That's why he clearly valued Shinjuin more than me. Yet told me he loved me. That's why he didn't care whether I lived or died. Song Zhang paused for a moment, thinking carefully. Yes. So what? The Luo family claimed that my injuries had not yet healed and that I needed to rest. She ordered me not to leave Tingzhu Garden until my father returned to the capital. She asserted that even if the letter reached my father, he would agree with her and never allow me to break off the engagement. There was no other reason. We couldn't afford to offend the Marquis of Xianyang. Song Zhang left for Qianzhou shortly thereafter. Before he left, he sent someone to tell me to keep the jade pendant safe, or else he didn't know what he would do. Because of this threat, the jade pendant still lies obediently on my desk. Yushan saw that I was frowning all day long, and felt bitter in her heart. She forced a smile and comforted me. Don't worry, miss. After all, you will be the wife of the Marquis' second son, and he even carved this jade pendant himself to appease you. It's clear that he has already realized his mistake. Realized his mistake? I gave a wry smile, my gaze falling on the imperfectly rounded white jade. Apologizing is a lie. Threatening is the truth. It's just a slap followed by a sweet treat, warning me not to be ungrateful. Hasn't it always been like this? Whether it was because I was jealous of his favoritism toward Shinjuin, or when he deliberately took what I loved and caused me to argue fiercely. If I didn't submit, he would ignore and distance himself. But once time had passed, he would return with gifts and sweet words. And I, foolishly, would fall for it every time. Thus, over the years, though our relationship was filled with conflicts, I deluded myself into thinking I was still free. I had forgotten that we were never equals. He had never once apologized to me. He merely found me amusing and indulged my whims when it suited him. Song Zhang said that my struggles were futile because the supreme authority of the throne stood between us. But if the monarchy is so powerful, why does Song Zhang treat me like trash? As if my life means nothing to him? This paradox is like a bone stuck in my throat, leaving me unable to understand or swallow. Luo sure heard about it and thought I was trying to starve myself in protest. She rushed into the bamboo courtyard with a fierce expression, grabbed me, and force-fed me without a word. When Zhang, it was you who insisted on seeking glory and ended up with this prestigious marriage. Now you're making a pitiful spectacle of yourself for whom to see. Luo sure sneered coldly. The second young master has already humbled himself to reconcile with you. You should know your place and stop acting so ungrateful after receiving such a great favor. Rage boiled in my heart, and I retorted without mercy. If you envy me so much, why don't you marry him yourself? After all, you're still quite attractive, someone like Song Zhang would treat you well. Luo Shi's face turned pale with anger. She shouted at the old maid beside her. The eldest miss has spoken disrespectfully to her mistress. slap her across the face and make her come to her senses. The old nurse obeyed, rolled up her sleeves, and rushed forward. Yuxuan cried out and rushed in front of me, but was pushed violently to the ground. Luo! I stared at her, my voice cold as ice. Since you want me to marry into the Marquis's mansion, you should know that I am destined to be the prince's consort. Are you sure you want to offend me here today? The wind from her slap brushed past my cheek, accompanied by Luosher's sharp stop. Her withered hand hung midair. She glared at me with a dark expression, forcing out a few good s through clenched teeth. Since you have no appetite, there's no need to waste food sending meals to the bamboo courtyard these days. Luosher shot me one last withering glance before storming off with a pale face. Yuxuan hurriedly crawled to my side, tears streaming down her face. Miss, don't be afraid. Master will be back soon. Once he finds out how Lady Luo has treated you, he won't let her off lightly. I struggled to sit up, exhausted and drained. Although my father had always been stubborn and strict, he had never treated me badly. If he knew that Zhang had deliberately injured me that day, he would be furious. But as Mrs. Luo had said, the Marquis's mansion was extremely powerful, and the Wen family couldn't afford to provoke them. Once his anger had subsided, my father would weigh the pros and cons and ultimately choose to side with Mrs. Luo. Then what about me? What? The Prince of Chong'an has come to the mansion? As I was feeling dejected, I suddenly heard Lady Luo's voice in the courtyard, almost unrecognizable from her usual tone. Immediately after, the servant's urgent and clear voice echoed. Yes, madam. The prince himself said that he came to express his gratitude for the eldest Mrs. selfless act of protecting him at the Chong'an prince's mansion. When it came to Prince Chong'an Xiaohong, my impression of him could be summed up in 8 words. Indulgent in luxury and pleasure. It was said that during the late emperor's reign, he was the prince he favored most. There were even rumors that he intended to make him his heir. Alas, this prince neglected his duties and only knew how to indulge in pleasure. The late emperor had no choice but to appoint Prince Hui as the heir. When Prince Hui ascended the throne at the age of 14, he placed great trust in his elder brother. With the new dynasty newly established and the court still unstable, the two brothers worked together in harmony, relying on one another. Now that the emperor has firmly secured the throne, Prince Chong'an has retired from his duties and resumed his life of debauchery. Perhaps due to the suppression he endured while assisting his younger brother, he has indulged in extravagance and hedonism over the years. Court officials' accusations came pouring in like snowflakes. Yet the emperor, out of brotherly affection, showed him extraordinary leniency and protection. Today, everyone in the realm knows of Prince Chong'an's eccentricity, arrogance, and reckless behavior. At the flower viewing banquet, I caught a glimpse of him from afar. He was strikingly handsome, with natural dignity that made one dare not look directly at him. Before I left to pay my respects, Lady Luo warned me sternly. He is of royal blood, how could he truly deign to visit a lowly girl like you? He must be using this opportunity to court your father. When you see him, do not speak out of turn. I nodded in agreement, but my mind was already spinning with plans. If it was the royal authority that was blocking my marriage, then I would use the royal authority to break the deadlock. Since Prince Chong'an had acknowledged my role in saving the emperor, why not play along and ask him for a decree to annul the marriage? I would pretend to be pitiful once I went out. I took a deep breath, feigning weakness, and stumbled out from behind the screen. This humble maiden, Wen Dong, pays her respects. Oh my goodness! Heaven have mercy! How has this child become so emaciated? Before I could finish my greetings, Xiao Hong exclaimed dramatically. His exaggerated tone startled everyone present. He stared at me intently, then looked at Luosher and said with a pained expression, "Look at her face. It's as white as rice paper." Look at her wrists. They're as thin as firewood. And look at her lips. TSK. TSK. There's not a trace of color. He pretended to support my arm as I bowed, then turned to Mrs. Luo and said in a sudden serious tone, Mrs. Luo, did you really invite a proper doctor to examine him? Mrs. Luo was still in shock and hadn't regained her composure. When she was addressed, she hurriedly replied, We did. But the injury is deep and cannot be healed overnight. He just needs to rest and recuperate. What? Rest? The patient is in this condition. And you dare to say rest? Xiao Hong roared angrily. A bunch of incompetent fools. How dare you treat my savior with such disregard? He suddenly turned to me, leaned slightly forward, and fixed his gaze directly into my eyes. Miss Wen, I happen to have a famous doctor staying at my estate. Before you recover, why don't you move to my residence and rest for a while? After saying that, he quickly added in a voice that only I could hear. This is what Minister Wen wants. My heart skipped a beat. Before I could respond, Luo Shi hurriedly interjected. Your Highness, this is absolutely out of the question. Dongyang is still unmarried and living in her family home. Moving to the prince's mansion would invite gossip. Besides, her constitution doesn't seem that frail. With time, she'll recover. Dongyang, isn't that right? As she spoke, she cast a sharp, warning glance in my direction. To be honest, I was completely confused. Instinctively, I turned to the person in front of me for help. However, Xiao Hong merely looked at me calmly, his eyes seeming to say, the choice is yours. This man cannot be fully trusted. But since he mentioned my father, there must be a reason. If I continue to be confined to the Wen mansion, it would be no different from waiting for death. My thoughts raced, and I bowed slightly, my voice weak and faint. Your Highness's kindness is overwhelming. This humble maiden is deeply humbled. But as the lady said, this matter, cough, might tarnish the prince's reputation. Moreover, my body, cough, is merely a scare. Cough. Even without seeking medical help. Cough. Before I could finish, I covered my mouth with a handkerchief and began coughing violently. It seemed as though I was coughing up my internal organs. The Luo family was speechless. The sharp-tongued woman who had just been arguing with her in the bamboo courtyard was now lying there, looking as though she were on her deathbed. She tried to explain, but Xiao Hong did not give her a chance to speak. He sighed deeply, his regret evident on his face. Alas! If it weren't for the mundane affairs that have kept me busy these past few days, I would have searched the entire world for a renowned physician to save you. Now, my savior has been delayed to this point. If I had truly heeded your words and stood by idly. He suddenly raised his eyes, his gaze sweeping sharply toward Luo Shi. Not only would my face be lost, but the entire imperial family would be mocked by the entire world. Luo Shi was completely dumbfounded. She hadn't said anything. How did she suddenly get blamed for bringing shame upon the imperial family? Luo Shi's face turned pale as she struggled to speak. Allow me to write a letter to Li Zhou to seek the master's instructions first. Me, cough. Luo Shi. Xiao Hong placed his hand on his forehead, his shoulders trembling slightly. After a few breaths, he regained his composure and issued a decisive order. Miss Wen Duan's condition is critical. There is no time to waste. We must depart immediately and return to the mansion. With that, he didn't allow Luo Shi to say another word. Xiao Hong gently wrapped his arm around my shoulder and led me out at a brisk pace. Once we were a distance from the main hall, he smiled and praised me. Your acting was quite good. I replied modestly. I'm no match for the prince. Song Zhang traveled for 7 days before finally arriving in Quanzhou. The local magistrate had been in a state of panic all day, eagerly awaiting Song Zhang's arrival. The dam in Yanshui County had burst a month earlier, flooding vast areas of houses and farmland downstream. Although the authorities had used sand and mud to block the floodwaters, the effect was minimal. As a result, the people of the county were in an uproar, and they had united to surround the county office. In theory, such a disaster should have been reported to the court immediately. However, the root of the problem lay in the fact that the dam had been extensively repaired last March at great expense. The funds allocated by the court were partially embezzled by Magistrate Li to curry favor with powerful officials. With reduced funds, inferior materials were used instead of quality ones. Originally, they had hoped the dam could hold for at least 2 or 3 years, but it collapsed in just 1 year. If only one county had been affected, Li Shifu might have managed to cover it up. But just a few days earlier, during the flood season, heavy rains caused the temporary dam to collapse again under the pressure. The floodwaters surged like a raging beast, engulfing several counties downstream and claiming hundreds of lives in an instant. At this point, Prefect Li could no longer hide anything, so he could only report the situation in vague terms. The arrival of Song Zhang was like a godsend for him. After all, the powerful and influential people he had to curry favor with in order to embezzle money were the Marquis's mansion in Xianyang. Prefect Li gave Song Zhang a detailed account of the disaster. And the more he spoke, the more his heart sank. In contrast, Song Zhang remained unusually calm. However, what he was calculating in his mind was not a plan to control the floodwaters. Rather, if this operation succeeded, he could use this achievement to present that request to the emperor. A request that would not only fulfill his own desires but also push Wendong into the abyss. At this thought, a fleeting, imperceptible gleam flashed in Song Zhang's eyes. The first time he had met Wendong, he had sensed that this woman was wild and untamed. Those eyes, brimming with the fearlessness and resilience of one untouched by the world, had stirred a hidden desire for destruction within him. He wanted to see her submit, to see her tremble with fear. He wanted to see her self-respect shattered, her sorrow and despair exposed. Thus, despite the vast disparity in their social standing, he had readily agreed to the marriage. Over the years, he had deliberately favored Shinjuin, not only because he genuinely valued her, but also to refine Diane's sharp edges. Once she lowered her head and submitted, he would treat her as he treated Shinjuin. But she was utterly oblivious, never bowing her head in his presence. 3 years had passed, and she remained an ungrateful, unambitious woman. Though she had her charms, he had grown tired of her. Thus, at the flower viewing banquet that day, he pushed her in front of the blade, not only to protect Shinjuin, but also to hide his murderous intent. At least, let him see that look of despair before she died. Alas! At that moment, her face was filled with shock, not the collapse he had anticipated. Fortunately, she was lucky to survive. Otherwise, he would never have had the chance to see her at the Wen mansion, crushed by reality and class, her body stiff and disheveled. Learn to obey quickly. Wen Dian. He truly wanted to tell her that himself. Her performance that day had pleased him, but it was still not perfect. It was not broken enough, not collapsed enough. Was it because he did not love her deeply enough? At this thought, Song Zhang felt a vague irritation sweep through his heart. Li, the prefect, had been waiting quietly by his side. Seeing Song Zhang frown, he assumed there was an obstacle in the flood control plan. After a moment, he could no longer contain himself. He spoke cautiously. May I ask how much the imperial court has allocated this time? Song Zhang snapped back to reality and gave a figure. What? That's not even half of what was spent on repairing the dam. Li Shifu was struck speechless, exclaiming in disbelief. Although I did underreport the casualties by 30%. The severity of the disaster is no exaggeration. How could the emperor? Before he could finish, he met Song Zhang's cold, stern gaze. The rest of his words were choked in his throat. After a moment of dead silence, he reluctantly spoke up. All the sandbags used to block the water in the city have been exhausted. The water is now raging, and the sand is loose and prone to collapse. If we need to purchase more, we can only buy clay, which is several times more expensive. But this meager relief fund is like trying to put out a fire with a cup of water. It won't stop the flood at all. Who said it can't be stopped? Song Zhang glared at him coldly. Aren't there still people? It was the height of summer, but Li felt a chill run from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. His lips trembled, wanting to say something, but he felt that anything he said would be wrong. The atmosphere was tense for a moment. Then Song Zhang suddenly smiled lightly. Minister, there is no need to panic. I was only joking. His expression returned to normal, and his tone was serious. If the relief money is insufficient, we must find a way to raise more. This place is not far from Lizhou. It should not be difficult to borrow emergency funds and grain from the prefect of Lizhou, right? Prefect Li looked troubled. I have considered this option, but last month, the imperial court sent a deputy minister of the Ministry of Revenue to Lizhou to audit the accounts. It would be inappropriate to go against the imperial will at this time. It's fine. Song Zhang waved his hand and said firmly. That deputy minister of the Ministry of Revenue is my future father-in-law. Although he is a bit rigid and stubborn, even if he doesn't give face to me, he will definitely not interfere for the sake of the thousands of disaster victims in Qian Prefecture. Minister, you can go ahead and borrow the money. Finally, Song Zhang did not forget to add. Remember, you must hurry. I spent a month convalescing at the prince's mansion, but I only saw Xiao Hong a handful of times. That day, after leaving the Wen mansion, I had intended to ask him immediately about the reason. For instance, why did he intervene to help? And why did he say it was my father's intention? However, after getting off the carriage, Xiao Hong arranged for me to stay in a secluded courtyard and then disappeared without a trace. The attendant said that the prince had likely gone off to seek pleasure again. Given his reputation, such talk was not surprising. Life at the Wang mansion was peaceful and uneventful. My health gradually improved under the doctor's care. At first, I assumed that the famous Dr. Xiao Hong mentioned was just an excuse, but he actually invited a physician to treat me. In the end, does he truly believe Song Zhang's claim of sacrificing oneself to protect the master? That night, the moonlight was like water. I paced in the courtyard, my mind in turmoil. A passing maid suddenly stopped at the door, smiling and waving at me. Miss Wen, the prince has returned and is currently in his study. If you have something to discuss with him, you should go quickly. Be careful, he might be gone by dawn. After thanking her repeatedly, I hurried to the study. The courtyard was brightly lit, and Xiao Hong's tall figure was clearly silhouetted against the window lattice. I suddenly felt a bit timid. After hesitating for a moment, I finally informed the guards and entered the room. I walked quietly, not daring to speak before entering. My gaze fell on Xiao Hong, who was leaning against the antique cabinet, resting his chin on his hand. There was no one attending him inside the room, and it was quiet outside as well. Xiao Hong had just survived an assassination attempt not long ago. The place where he was staying should have been heavily guarded. Yet the guards had let me in so easily, and he himself was completely unguarded. No matter how I looked at it, something felt off. I didn't know whether to stay or leave. After hesitating for a moment, he finally gathered his courage and approached, calling out softly, "Your Highness?" The only response was his steady, deep breathing. Now that he was closer, He could see the candlelight dancing on his flawlessly handsome face. Xiao Hong's brows betrayed his fatigue, adding a touch of divine grace to his usually striking features. I was puzzled. Had this man truly gone to indulge in pleasure? Xiao Hong was sleeping deeply, and even without looking, I knew it was best not to disturb him further. Feeling helpless, I was about to leave quietly and wait for another opportunity. Suddenly, a mosquito buzzed over and landed on his high, straight nose, unaware of the danger. When I was a child, I had been bitten by such a poisonous mosquito on my eyelid. The next morning, the pain and itching were unbearable, and the swelling was so severe that I wondered if it was a wasp in disguise. Xiao Hong was of noble birth. If he were to go out with a swollen nose the next day, the scene was too terrifying to imagine. So I raised my hand, intending to crush it. Suddenly, I snapped back to reality. If that slap had landed on Xiao Hong's face, it wouldn't be the mosquito that died, but me. If you don't swat it, I'll have to do it myself. Just as I was panicking, a lazy, smiling voice suddenly rang out. Xiao Hong had opened his eyes at some point. His narrow, phoenix-like eyes gazing at me with a hint of exasperation. I hurriedly bowed. This humble maiden was rash and disturbed your highness's sleep. Please forgive me. Rise. Watching this vile creature suck my blood, is there a greater sin than that? Xiao Hong said, slapping his nose with a loud smack. He then took out a handkerchief to wipe his hands, a hint of satisfaction on his brow. He raised his eyes, his gaze lingering on my face for a moment, and sighed. This Li Daoming is indeed renowned. In just a month, your complexion has changed so much. You seem a little plumper? Mr. Li's medical skills are divine. With a single glance, he saw the root of my illness. Thanks to the prince's kindness, I was able to rest here in peace. Now my body has completely recovered. I have no way to repay such a great favor. Xiao Hong raised his hand to stop my pleasantries. No need for formalities. You've been looking for me everywhere these past few days. What for? Suddenly, a flash of understanding crossed his eyes. He added, let's make this clear. I know you didn't block the sword for me that day. Don't expect me to repay you. I had already guessed as much, so I wasn't surprised. I asked him, if that's the case, you used this as an excuse to save me, even claiming it was my father's wish. Could it really be that my father entrusted you with this? But he is far away in Lizhou. How could he know about my situation? Xiao Hong picked up the jade teapot on the table, poured 2 cups of tea, pushed one of them toward me, and said slowly, although the flower viewing banquet was in chaos that day, I have good eyesight and happened to see Song Heir push you in front of the knife with his own hands. When I heard that you were sent to Lizhou by imperial order, I was also here. So out of kindness and to repay your father's favor, I told you about this matter. My heart tightened. Father. What did he say? What did he say? Xiao Hong seemed to think of something interesting, and the corners of his lips curled slightly. He cursed. He vividly described the scene that day. The usually gentle man cursed Song Zhang for 2.5 hours, mixing in many obscure and difficult-to-understand dialects and vulgar street language. Recalling Minister Wen's frantic appearance at that time, Xiao Hong couldn't suppress the smile on the corners of his mouth. Although I was surprised, I could imagine what my father looked like. However, compared to his overwhelming anger towards Song Zhang, Minister Wen was more worried about you. Xiao Hong suppressed his smile and spoke in a very serious tone. He called you his eldest daughter. You look straightforward and reserved, but you actually have a strong temperament, are very determined, and often act in unexpected ways. He is afraid that when you wake up, you will rush to Song Zhang and fight him to the death, or in a moment of rage, do something irreparable. Hearing this, a wave of bitterness suddenly rose in my throat. My fingertips tightened unconsciously. I guess my father doesn't want to offend the Marquis's mansion. He's afraid that you will discover that the marriage is hopeless and, in despair, take your own life. Xiao Hong interrupted sharply, his expression unusually serious. The facts are exactly as he predicted. After Song Zhang came to see you, weren't you nearly starving yourself to death? I was startled and hurriedly said, "That's absolutely not true. This servant girl simply had no appetite. It was Luo Shi who. You truly never entertained such a thought?" Xiao Hong's all-seeing gaze and unquestioning tone made all my excuses stick in my throat. At a loss for words, I could only lower my eyes guiltily. Seeing me like this, Xiao Hong's expression softened slightly. When he spoke again, his tone was much gentler. "I understand your desire to die rather than marry Song Zhang again. And Minister Wen understands it even better. However, the difficulty lies in the fact that this is a marriage arranged by the heavens. Minister Wen was willing to put aside his pride and serve me, a prince he had once impeached. And he also asked me to protect you and help you escape." Xiao Hong took a sip of the warm tea in his cup, seeming to reflect on the situation. That stubborn old man, who was once so rigid, is now willing to bow to me. He must care deeply for you. I bit my lip, struggling to suppress the bitter tears welling up in my nose. I feared that if I spoke, the tears would spill over. Xiao Hong remained silent, patiently waiting for me to compose myself before continuing. "Even if I want to plead your case before the emperor, your marriage to the Marquis of Xianyang still needs the approval of your aunt, Princess Changle. Unfortunately, I am not on good terms with her. She is in poor health and has a bad temper. All I can do is try to arrange a meeting between you and her. Whether you can persuade her to change her mind is entirely up to you." With that, he gave a mischievous smile. "Don't disappoint me." As night fell, when Shu chatted with him for a while before taking his leave, Xiao Hong stood by the window until the slender figure disappeared around the corner of the corridor, then turned and took a sealed letter from a wooden box. The letter was sent from Liz Ho, detailing the local officials' years of falsifying disaster reports and embezzling funds. Xiao Hong clenched his fingers tightly. Over the years, he had appeared to withdraw from court life, enjoying a life of pleasure. In reality, he had been secretly investigating corruption within the court. Admittedly, the plot of a decadent prince who is actually an imperial spy was somewhat cliché. However, Xiao Hong had indeed used this identity to expose many corrupt officials. The assassin at the flower viewing banquet was from Li Zhou. He had been infiltrating the prince's mansion for years, aiming to assassinate this greatest corrupt official in the realm and avenge his relatives who had died in the disaster. Xiao Hong followed the trail and eventually discovered that the prefect of Li Zhou was not only corrupt but also deeply colluding with high-ranking officials in the capital. He pretended to visit Li Zhou for sightseeing, using banquets and feasts to gather intelligence. He discovered that the plague in Li Zhou years ago was actually caused by human intervention. The mastermind behind it all was none other than Song Ju, the late crown prince of Xianyang, who had died nearly a year ago. Back then, he had colluded with the prefect to transport the bodies of infected barbarians from the border regions into Li Zhou, triggering the plague. Not only did he seal off the news, trapping the infected civilians in an isolated city to die, but he also falsified the list of disaster victims, embezzling a huge sum of relief funds from the court. Unfortunately, this man acted with meticulous care, leaving no trace of evidence. Those involved either fled far away or died suddenly after his death. If someone were to say that the Xianyang Marquis had no hand in this, Xiao Hong would never believe it. His eyes darkened as he carefully tucked away the secret letter. Just then, hurried footsteps echoed outside the corridor. The personal guard Zhou Yong burst through the door, unable to resist glancing back as he entered. Strange. I heard the young lady enter looking gloomy and distressed. Yet now she's leaving with such a cheerful expression? What kind of magic potion did you use to make her so happy? Seeing his lack of respect, Xiao Hong deliberately frowned. Zhou Yang, you dare to let someone in while I was resting? If anything goes wrong, the emperor will hold you responsible. Come on. It was just Miss Wen. What could she possibly do to you? Zhou Yang shrugged indifferently. Besides, she's been looking for you for days. Now that she finally caught you returning to the mansion, how could I possibly stop her? Moreover, you've been away from the mansion for days, and you've been constantly asking about Miss Wen's well-being, haven't you? Listening to Zhou Yang's rapid-fire words, coupled with his enigmatic expression, Xiao Hong felt his temples throb. When he had initially agreed to cooperate with Wen Longzhong, Xiao Hong had planned to stay in Lizhou for a while longer. To ensure Wen Dong's safety, he had sent Zhou Yang to secretly monitor the Wen mansion and report back regularly. Xiao Hong's original intention was only to ensure Wen Dong's safety and avoid any reckless actions. Little did he expect that this young man would act like a lovesick fool, meticulously recording every single one of Wen Dong's movements and expressions in his letters. Today, Miss Wen awoke with a slight frown between her brows, likely due to the pain from her wounds. Miss Wen argued with Song Heir, the second young master, and threw away all the tokens they had exchanged in the past. Miss Wen had a heated argument with her stepmother, who then harshly reduced her food rations. At first, Xiao Hong had no interest in such trivial matters and forced himself to read through them. However, over time, he began to find these everyday details intriguing. He often found himself wondering, did the young lady eat well today? Has she managed to cheer up a bit? Upon returning to the capital, he strongly recommended Song Zhang to the emperor as the candidate for flood control. If one were to consider the welfare of the people of Qianzhou, an official as upright and incorruptible as Wen Longzhong from the Ministry of Works would be the ideal choice. If the emperor were to select someone personally, he would certainly choose an honest minister. However, the disaster in Qianzhou had already reached a critical stage. In Xiao Hong's eyes, there was little that could be salvaged. To the powerful, human lives were no more than fleeting insects. Xiao Hong never condoned the disregard for human life. But on the path of punishing the wicked, some sacrifices were unavoidable. The emperor ruled with benevolence, but it was difficult to reverse this downward trend. Xiao Hong believed that making this cruel decision for his younger brother was the meaning of his existence. So he recommended Song Zhang and decided to use this flood to find something to hold over the Marquis of Xianyang. Therefore, he instructed Wen Longzhong not to interfere if Qianzhou asked for grain and money. All he had to do was lure the other party into leaving the loan documents behind, and he would be able to find an opportunity to thoroughly investigate the Marquis's mansion. The key to success or failure lay in Wen Longzhong's ability to deceive people. Before leaving, Xiao Hong was particularly malicious in teasing the old stick in the mud. If this plan fails, once Song Zhang returns victorious and marries your daughter, the Wen and Song families will become one. Should the truth ever come to light in the future, the Wen family will be doomed. Minister Wen must be extremely cautious. These words sent a chill down the old man's spine. After a moment, he replied, Your Highness has promised to help my daughter annul the engagement. But that also depends on whether Wen Dong makes an effort. Doesn't it? Xiao Hong smiled slyly. If both you and your daughter fail, this prince truly won't be able to help. A few days later, Xiao Hong kept his promise. When he entered the palace to audience with the emperor, he brought Wen Dian with him. As they approached the gates of the Changel Palace, he repeatedly warned her, My aunt is naturally proud and arrogant. Now that she is ill, she is even more fiery. No matter what she says, remember to speak carefully and act cautiously. Under no circumstances must you. He paused, then added, Throw things at her. Wen Dong was slightly startled, rarely showing a hint of reproach. Your Highness, rest assured, this servant still wishes to live a long life. Xiao Hong couldn't help but smile. watching her follow the eunuch into the depths of the palace. He then turned and headed toward the Chang'an palace. He reported to the emperor in detail about recent developments and also exchanged some casual remarks about his brothers. Before he knew it, 2 hours had passed. Xiao Hong left the Chang'an hall and was about to head to the Chang'an palace to inquire about the situation. As he approached the Xianqing gate, he saw a familiar figure standing alone. When Dong must have just left the Chang'an palace, her expression was still solemn. Xiao Hong watched from a distance for a moment, but saw her standing motionless. The sense of foreboding in his heart suddenly intensified. He almost instinctively quickened his pace, rushing toward her with a sense of urgency he hadn't even noticed himself. "What's the situation?" Before Wen Dun could answer, several scenes flashed through Xiao Hong's mind, the princess of Chang'an raging at her or mocking her with sharp words. However, Wen Dun's eyelashes trembled slightly as she slowly raised her gaze. Her eyes were filled with confusion and an almost absurd strangeness. The princess said. She forgot? Before audience with the Grand Princess, I had imagined every possible outcome. There were only 2 possibilities, permission or denial. But I never anticipated she would choose the third option. I forgot. Her cold voice echoed down from the high hall. Just 3 light words. Princess Chang'an leaned against the carved chair, showing no trace of doubt or curiosity. I instantly understood that she hadn't truly forgotten. That was the arrogance of those in power. The marriage contract that had determined half of my life was nothing more than a casual remark to her. She was too lazy to change it and too arrogant to take responsibility. She said she had forgotten. But the world remembered, and those involved remembered even more. The night was as cold as water, and I stood by the pond in the prince's mansion, lost in thought. Behind me, I heard the sound of light footsteps, and Xiao Hong's voice fell from behind. That's how it is with class. Those in power can act however they please, but those below them can do nothing about it. In his tone, there was a hint of unhidden melancholy and self-mockery. He chuckled softly and asked, "Have you lost hope in this world?" I shook my head slowly. Though unexpected, such a predicament was not entirely unforeseen. I lowered my head to gaze at the pond water and sighed deeply from the bottom of my heart. This servant merely feels. Power is truly alluring. The Grand Princess was like this, and Song Zhang was no different. With just their own will, they could toy with me as they pleased. I was filled with anger, resentment, and unwillingness. Yet I couldn't help but yearn for it. At this point, what else could I say but power is truly wonderful? The evening breeze rustled through the leaves, the only sound in the air. Xiao Hong remained silent for a long time. I looked up and met his startled gaze. Your Highness? A soft call snapped him out of his reverie. A fleeting look of unease crossed his face. After a moment of silence, he smiled and said, Wen Dong, don't give in. I'm looking forward to it. The next day, I visited the residence of Princess Minghua. After exchanging pleasantries, I revealed everything Song Zhang had done. I never imagined this man could be so cunning. Minghua furrowed her brows. What should I do? Qiong? I dare not trouble the princess with such a major matter. However, recalling the horseball tournament 3 years ago, the reason the princess consort arranged the marriage was because I reminded her of her own marriage to the prince. Therefore, I thought that if I explained to the princess the differences between Song Zhang and the prince, perhaps it could sway her heart. Minghua had been raised by the eldest princess as a child and should know about the late prince consort. To my surprise, Minghua smiled strangely upon hearing this. Dongyang, you are mistaken. It is not Song Zhang who resembles the prince consort, but you who resemble him. I was taken aback. She continued. Back then, the two met through polo. On the field, the prince consort was just like you, relentless and giving his all. After my aunt lost the game, she turned to the emperor and requested the marriage. But you know, in our dynasty, a prince consort cannot hold official office. With his lofty ambitions, he was ultimately confined to the princess's mansion. His ambitions shattered. Minghua sighed. My aunt admired his unwavering resolve. Yet she also wanted to see him bow his head. The prince consort was a wise man. Soon after their marriage, the two grew deeply in love. The room suddenly fell silent. Seeing that I didn't speak, Minghua whispered, "Shu Nyang. Sometimes, submitting is also a way of not submitting." I pondered the deeper meaning of her words, smiled wryly, and then turned to talk about idle gossip in the capital. As we parted, Minghua whispered, "If Shu Nyang can truly escape this predicament, it would be a great fortune." I heard the day before yesterday that the Marquis of Xianyang's mansion had invited the imperial physician to take the pulse of the crown prince's wife, and there was a 90% chance that the baby was a boy. If that is the case, even if you marry into the Marquis's mansion, you will not be the crown prince's wife. According to our court etiquette, when the heir to a title dies, his legitimate son should inherit it. If there is no legitimate son, then his brother should succeed him. Before that, Shinjuin had always said that she was pregnant with a girl. Now it seems that Song Zhang's dream of becoming the crown prince is shattered. After that, I earnestly requested Xiao Hong to arrange another audience with the princess. However, the palace gates were tightly closed, and I could only kneel outside the hall and beg to be admitted. Perhaps 2 hours passed, or perhaps longer. The heavy palace gates finally opened. As soon as I saw the figure on the dais, I prostrated myself on the ground and knelt. 3 years ago, this servant was granted a marriage by Your Highness to Song Zhang, the second son of the Marquis of Xianyang. However, this man is ambitious and used the servant as a shield to take my life, and he showed no remorse afterwards. I beg Your Highness to have mercy and allow this servant to withdraw from this marriage." Princess Changle looked gloomy and was very unhappy that I had disturbed her peace. "You insolent girl. I thought you had some sense of propriety. Don't you realize that this marriage is a favor bestowed upon you? Your Highness, please see clearly. If this favor were granted to both me and Song Zhang, then his disregard for the life of his betrothed would be an affront to Your Highness's authority. Such a disrespectful person towards royal power, my request is both reasonable and justified." Humph. Sharp-tongued. Princess Changle covered her mouth with a handkerchief and coughed a few times. Then continued, "Even if I allow you to break off the marriage, what then? The Marquis of Xianyang's mansion is at the height of its power. You are the daughter of a lowly official. If you offend them, how can you expect to live? You'd better take advantage of the fact that he still has some affection for you and speak to him gently. Who knows? You may still have a comfortable life in the future." I bit my lip. Did Your Highness advise the prince consort in the same way back then? As soon as the words left my mouth, the air in the chamber froze. The deathly silence hung like a sharp blade overhead, suffocating everyone present. To be honest, I was terrified. My knees trembled uncontrollably, and my back was soaked through with cold sweat. But I had no way out. I took a deep breath and spoke again. Perhaps in the princess's eyes, the lowly are meant to crawl on the ground. Thus, when you encounter a stubborn person who refuses to bow down, you treasure them like a precious gem, taking them into your hands. What you seek is not their true heart, but to break their pride with your own hands and make them submit. Then, for you, this is not a marriage, but a game where another's life is the stake. How dare you? Princess Changle's face turned red with anger. But strangely, she did not call for anyone to drag me out. Song Zhang sought to take my daughter's life because he viewed her as a plaything. Your Highness broke the soul of the prince. So what do you consider him to be? I dared to look up and meet Princess Changle's furious gaze. The prince died young, filled with sorrow, and left no words for you before his death. All these years. Have you truly never regretted it? The hall was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. After an unknown amount of time, a short, mocking laugh came from above. When Zhang, you dare to be so bold and speak so harshly. She clenched her teeth but suddenly sighed softly. This stubbornness reminds me of Yuan. Princess Changle took a deep breath, as if she had been waiting for someone to listen to her story for a long time. Back then, I lost a game of polo to Yuan, and I was very upset. I begged my father to make him my husband, not because I loved him, but because I wanted to see him bow down to me. But even though we were forced into marriage, whenever we argued, he would never admit he was wrong. It's laughable now, but I used every trick in the book, and he still wouldn't give in. In the end, I had to threaten his family's lives before he finally bowed his head to me. Princess Changle gazed into the distance, her eyes filled with sorrow. You ask if I regret it? Of course I do. I regret it deeply. Her voice suddenly grew sharp, tinged with pain. In my youth, I was arrogant and ignorant, believing that as long as he admitted defeat, I would win. After that, I took whatever I wanted, and he complied with everything, thinking that he finally loved me as much as I loved him. But when he was on his deathbed, all he asked was that I not harm his family. Only then did I realize how precarious his position had been all these years, and how desperate he must have felt in his final moments. Princess Changle staggered down the jade steps and turned her back to me, saying, 3 years ago, when I saw you with Zhang, I felt as though I were seeing the past. I had hoped that you too might find a different path than the one Yuan and I took. Alas, it seems we have ended up on the same path after all. She gave a nod to the palace maid, who immediately helped me to my feet. Her eyes, which had once been full of dignity, were now filled with tears. When she looked at me, it seemed like she was nostalgic and sad. There was also a hint of mockery. Zhang may be me, but you are not Yuan. I will ask the emperor to revoke your marriage contract with the Marquis of Xianyang. As for the consequences, you'll have to fend for yourself. Her words were firm, and she turned to leave. Your Highness, I called out to her. Someone once told the servant that sometimes yielding to the present circumstances is a way to protect the unyielding belief in one's heart. My voice trembled slightly, but it was clear. This servant believes that the prince consort was not entirely consumed by despair back then. He might have been waiting for your highness to truly understand his heart. Minghua had said that when the prince looked at the princess, the love in his eyes was genuine. Beneath his submissive posture, there might have been a deep-seated hope. The hope that one day the princess would awaken and stand by his side, rather than looking down on him from above. Princess Changle's footsteps suddenly came to a halt. Her back stiffened for a moment, but she did not turn around, and then slowly disappeared behind the palace. Several days later, I received an imperial edict at the Chong'an prince's mansion. The marriage between the Song and Wen families was hereby annulled, and from this day forward, they were no longer related by marriage and had no further connection. After 2 months of flood control efforts, Zhang finally returned to the capital before Shenjuan gave birth. Though this rescue mission had its twists and turns, it ultimately ended without major incident. He had originally thought he would have to argue with his father-in-law from the Ministry of Revenue, but to his surprise, the latter only asked him to sign a loan agreement before granting him permission to leave. Zhang had no intention of signing it. After all, leaving a paper trail could eventually become a liability. However, he must return to the capital as soon as possible to exchange his flood control achievements for the emperor's favor. Moreover, the governor of Lizhou had been a colleague of his late brother, and since Tao was engaged to his family, a mere document should pose no problem. On the day of his departure, the people of Qian Prefecture knelt by the roadside, bowing their heads in gratitude. Just as he was about to board the carriage, a clump of earth flew through the air, hitting his official robe squarely. "Villain! Corrupt official!" The angry shouts of children echoed from the crowd. Zhang looked in the direction of the voice and saw a thin woman frantically covering her child's mouth. A faint cold snort escaped his nostrils, but his face remained calm as he bowed to the officials seeing him off. Upon arriving in the capital that day, Zhang returned to his residence, exhausted from the journey. Before he could rest for a moment, he changed into his court robes and hurried straight to the palace. In the Hall of Imperial Grace, the young emperor carefully reviewed his report. As he listened to him describe the disaster, Minister Zhang is exceptionally talented. In just 2 months, you have quelled the flood in Qianzhou and restored peace to the people. Your contributions are immeasurable. The emperor smiled and asked, "Speak, Minister Zhang. What reward do you desire?" Zhang's heart raced, but he feigned hesitation, declining repeatedly before finally saying, "Since my elder brother passed away, my elder sister-in-law has been weeping every day, filled with sorrow and despair. Now that my brother's term of service is nearly complete, my elder sister-in-law is still in her prime, yet she has no intention of remarrying. She only worries about the child in her womb, who will have no father to accompany him in the future." He paused, then quietly raised his eyes to gauge the emperor's intentions. "Therefore, I dare to follow the example of the sages of old and marry my elder sister-in-law, and adopt her son as my own, to fulfill the bonds of humanity." The hall fell into sudden silence. Zhang's heart tightened, and he hurriedly added, "Of course, my elder sister-in-law will hold the position of a concubine, and there is no intention to break the marriage contract with the Wen family." A concubine, though it was merely a whisper. For some reason, Zhang detected a hint of sarcasm. But before he could think further, the emperor had already put on a smile. "Minister Zhang is a man of great virtue and righteousness. How could I possibly refuse?" With that, he picked up his brush, dipped it in ink, and swiftly drafted an imperial edict. A eunuch bowed and presented the bright yellow scroll to Zhang. He suppressed his joy and knelt to express his gratitude without even glancing at the scroll. However, when the imperial edict was unfolded and his eyes fell upon the words permitting Shinjuin to be his primary wife, Zhang's blood froze in his veins. The emperor noticed his confusion and explained with a smile, "Minister Zhang's actions are the height of kindness. How could he be criticized by the world for marrying a concubine in violation of etiquette? Moreover, the young lady from the Wen family has already requested to call off the engagement. I have already arranged for her to marry my irresponsible elder brother. She will never come to trouble you again, since you have always cherished the Shin family. With my imperial decree, you may marry your sister-in-law with dignity and love her wholeheartedly." Zhang didn't know how he left the palace or how he returned to the marquis's mansion. He was distraught and rushed straight to the Wen family's residence, but was turned away. The doorkeeper said fearfully, "The eldest lady was invited to the prince's residence 2 months ago to recuperate. The prince is grateful for your saving her life and has specially ordered that she stay there a little longer." Zhang was struck as if by lightning. He never imagined that he had dug his own grave. Wen Dong must have used the power of the Prince of Chong'an to successfully call off the engagement. Thinking of the emperor's words, "Send her away," a surge of bitterness rose in Zhang's heart. What did "send her away" mean? Was Wen Dong to become a concubine? Or was she to be bestowed upon the prince's mansion as a concubine? She was clearly his possession, his plaything. How could she be so easily handed over to another? A raging fire of jealousy and resentment burned away his reason. Zhang disregarded his dignity and pounded on the gate of Wen's mansion. He declared that he would not leave until he saw Wen Tao. The doorkeeper was so anxious he was about to cry. "The minister has not yet returned to the capital, and the lady has also returned to her hometown. Second young master, even if you break down the door, you won't be able to see anyone." Zhang was stunned. when Tao should have finished auditing the accounts long ago. So why hadn't he returned yet? He turned and rushed back to the Marquis's mansion, barging straight into the courtyard where Shinzuin was staying. The maidservant saw Song Zhang and grew wary. But she didn't know why he was so angry today. Before she could enter the house to report, he pushed her aside and burst into the bedroom. Shinzuin was leaning against the bed, embroidering a small garment for the child in her womb. Suddenly, she heard the door slam open, startling her so much that her hand trembled, and the silver needle pierced her fingertip. Before she could feel the pain, she looked up and saw who had entered, her face turning pale instantly. She instinctively wanted to flee, but her heavy body couldn't move. Gu Ji. About the child. Ain. Don't be afraid. I didn't come here to confront you. Looking at Shinjuin's deathly pale face, Song Zhang forced down the rage churning inside him and squeezed out a twisted smile. Gu Ji. I was wrong. It was the doctor who deceived me. And I thought it was a girl. I really didn't mean to deceive you. Shinjuin cried profusely and shrank back, trembling. After Song Ju's death, she discovered that she had a posthumous child. This was supposed to be a great joy for the Marquis's mansion. But when she discovered that Song Zhang, her husband's younger brother and her childhood friend whom she had always gotten along with, seemed to view the fetus as a thorn in his side, she had not slept soundly since. To keep Song Zhang in check, she paid a fortune to a fortune teller from the underworld to insist that the fetus was a girl. Song Zhang heard this but did not respond, though his brows visibly relaxed. Shinjuin had planned to keep it a secret until the child was born. But after the flower viewing banquet, the imperial physician, eager to please Xian Yongho, insisted that it was a boy and would be born healthy. At that moment, Song Zhang remained silent but took leave to rest. He stayed by her side day and night to help her recover. During a gathering, she nearly miscarried, and it was all Song Zhang's doing. Now, Song Zhang was closing in, his voice soft yet chilling. It's all right, Ain. I have already petitioned the emperor to marry you as my concubine. From now on, this child will be my own flesh and blood. Shinjuin's face turned ashen. Unfortunately, there was a mix-up along the way, and Donger withdrew the marriage. Therefore, you are now my legitimate wife. Don't cry. Be happy. I've wanted to marry you since I was a child, but my older brother beat me to it. Now, after all these twists and turns, you are still my wife. Song Zhang paused, his voice turning cold. But why didn't you listen to me? He suddenly rushed forward and grabbed her by the neck. I clearly told you to summon Wendian to the mansion every day and keep a close eye on her. The maid screamed and scrambled away. Shinjuin struggled to pry open his tight fingers. Struggling to speak, one girl is recovering at the prince's mansion. How could I let go? Only when Shinjuin's face turned purple did Song Zhang finally release her. Xian Yongho rushed over upon hearing the news and, seeing the scene, erupted in anger. Wretch! How dare you treat your pregnant elder sister-in-law like this? You're no better than an animal. Song Zhang ignored him and threw the imperial edict at him. From today onward, Ain is my wife. He turned around, walked out the door resolutely, and never looked back. I stayed in the prince's mansion for nearly 3 months. My father finally returned to the capital at the end of the month, looking exhausted from his journey. That night, he wore dark-colored casual clothes and sneaked into the Chong'an prince's mansion. Behind him followed a middle-aged man who looked haggard. My father introduced him as the magistrate of Lizhou. He had personally overheard the prefect conspiring with Song Ju and was now willing to testify as a witness to expose the crimes of the Xianyang Marquis mansion. It was then that I realized the weight of the favor Xiao Hong had mentioned. Xiao Hong generously praised him. You are very capable, Minister Wen. With this, We can combine the ironclad evidence we have gathered and skip the investigation altogether. We can send them straight to the Supreme Court for a strict trial." My father's brows were furrowed, and he was filled with rage. "Such vermin! Their actions are despicable. Don't they know that the people are the foundation of the country? And that when the foundation is solid, the country will be peaceful?" Xiao Hong sighed bitterly, his eyes filled with sorrow. At that moment, any words of comfort felt hollow. That night, the Xianyang Marquis mansion was surrounded by troops as fierce as wolves. The once prestigious mansion was reduced to a prison in an instant. Xianyang Ho and his followers were roughly dragged onto prison carts. Yet, despite searching everywhere, there was no sign of the second young master, who had once been so close to inheriting the title of prince. A few days later, I heard that Xianyang Ho had suffered greatly in prison. The prison guards were from Lizi Prefecture and, upon learning that the plague that had struck the region years ago had been orchestrated by his eldest son, they showed no mercy. The soldiers even seized countless secret letters and account books colluding with local officials, as well as piles of ill-gotten gains from the deep basement of the Marquis' mansion. Shinjuin was so frightened by the confiscation of her family's property that she had a miscarriage that night. The Shin family used this as an excuse to petition for her. In the end, she was spared from being sold off and returned to her family to recover. As for Song Zhang, he had vanished without a trace, as if he had been erased from the face of the earth. But he couldn't escape the capital. I think I know where he's going. That night, the moonlight was dim. In a dark alley, Song Zhang staggered along. He was dressed in dirty, coarse cloth, his body covered in patches of blood. In recent days, he had been hiding in the home of a blind old woman. He had told her some lies, and she had helped him evade his pursuers. Until recently, she suddenly asked him if he was the young master of a Marquis' mansion who was being hunted by the entire city. He had no choice. He couldn't die. At least, he couldn't die here. On the night the Marquis' mansion was ransacked, he was drowning his sorrows in wine at a tavern because of Wenxing. After hearing the bad news, he rushed back like a madman, but all he saw was his family being taken away in prison carts. Song Zhang didn't have time to think, so he fled like a rat. Later, he heard that when Longzhong from the Ministry of Revenue had been promoted to serving minister and rewarded generously for his anti-corruption efforts, he finally realized that he had fallen into this man's trap. His current miserable state was all thanks to the Wen family. Song Zhang followed the alley to the back wall of the Wen mansion and leaped over it with a single bound. He had been to the Wen mansion several times before and was well acquainted with its layout. At that moment, he had only one thought in his mind: revenge. He would first sneak into the young daughter's bedroom, strangle the innocent child to death, and then throw the body at Wen Tao's bedside. Then, in front of him, he would personally end the life of his stepmother. When the old man was writhing in agony and begging for mercy, he would strike off his head with a single blow, hang it on the door frame, so that everyone who entered the Wen mansion would see his terrified, twisted face first. As for Wen Dong, he would humiliate her. This was the most despairing way to treat a woman. Even if he were executed, she would still have to live out her life bearing an irreparable stain on her name. How could the Prince of Chong'an want such a fallen woman? What man in the world wouldn't despise her? What could be worse than having to live as a widow for her own sake? Song Zhang's eyes were bloodshot as he hurried down a hidden path toward the backyard. Strangely, the Wen mansion was unusually quiet tonight. There was not a single soul in sight along the way. However, at that moment, his heart was filled with rage, leaving him no time to ponder the unusual silence. He rushed to the backyard and pushed the door with his sword. With a loud thud, a tremendous force suddenly struck him. Song Zhang was immediately pinned to the ground by several hands. Several flashes of light appeared simultaneously, blinding Song Zhang. "I knew you would come here to seek revenge." Wen Dong's icy voice rang out from behind him. Song Zhang struggled to turn his head and saw that he was surrounded by soldiers in armor. "Wendong! You venomous woman! You whore!" Song Zhang's eyes bulged with fury as he roared like a wild beast. "It was you and your father who plotted this treacherous scheme to harm me. It was you who drove me to this desperate situation. It's all your fault." At that moment, Song Zhang had lost all traces of his former noble demeanor. His face was contorted beyond recognition, resembling a flesh-eating demon. "Song Zhang, you brought this upon yourself. If you hadn't been so corrupt and done such despicable things, who could have stopped you?" When Dian spoke, tossing a jade pendant at him. It was the jade pendant he had carved himself, a symbol of imperial favor. Song Zhang stared intently at the jade pendant, his screams turning into desperate roars. He could no longer shake the cold shackles or the fate that awaited him. He refused to accept it. How could someone like him, a once promising young nobleman, fall into the hands of a lowly woman he had once regarded as a plaything? The soldiers dragged him past her like a dead dog. She leaned slightly forward, her gaze indifferent as it fell on his disheveled face. "Song Zhang, what stands before you? Neither conspiracy nor royal power." He heard her cold laugh. "But the rule of law." Extra story. The case of the Marquis of Xianyang's mansion did not come to a close until March of the following year. The case was very widespread, and the Marquis of Xianyang and his cronies were all beheaded in the fall. All the women in the mansion were made slaves. Those with lesser crimes were exiled to the bitterly cold border regions. Some became minors, others military slaves. Song Zhang was also among those exiled. Before his departure, he pleaded to see the eldest miss one last time. When Dun refused, but Xiao Hong went to see him off instead. The prince's ability to hide his true intentions is truly remarkable. No one noticed him all these years. At that moment, Song Zhang was as withered as rotten wood, with not a trace of his former recklessness or arrogance left in his brows. Xiao Hong said indifferently, "He doesn't hold a candle to your elder brother. His thoughts were too intricate. Had he not ascended to heaven prematurely, even I would have found it difficult to uncover his flaws." The implication was clear. Song Zhang, who had fallen into the trap so easily, was no match for him. Song Zhang gave a bitter smile and pulled out a jade pendant from his sleeve. This was the one he had given to Wendong earlier, which she had discarded, but he had picked it up again. In the days since he had been imprisoned, he had used the rough stone walls to grind it day after day, finally smoothing its edges until it was round and smooth. Now that things have come to this, I have no face to see her. Please, Your Highness, deliver this jade to her. Let it serve as a keepsake. Xiao Hong took it without looking, then flung it into the icy lake by the roadside. Song Zhang's pupils contracted sharply. He instinctively lunged forward to retrieve it but was tripped by his shackles, falling to the ground with blood streaming from his chin. "Song Zhang, stop pretending. You're not leaving a keepsake, you're just trying to disgust her." Xiao Hong looked down contemptuously at the man lying on the ground in a sorry state. "Do you really think you've been given a new lease on life? The road to exile is long and arduous. You've offended so many people in the Marquis's mansion. Do you think you'll have an easy time on the road?" Hearing this, the last trace of color drained from Song Zhang's face. Xiao Hong sneered, "Enjoy the rest of your life." Only when the escort team disappeared from the city gate did the woman sitting in the distant tea pavilion put down her teacup. Just as she was about to call the waiter to settle the bill, someone had already seated themselves across from her. "Waiter, 2 cups of tea and a plate of osmanthus cake." "Coming right up." Xiao Hong smiled at Wendong, "You're all talk. Since you're here, why bother hiding behind that silly veil? Are you afraid people won't recognize you?" Wendong snorted lightly, "This servant merely wishes to see the fate of my enemy with my own eyes. I fear he might take it as a sign of lingering affection. What if this foolish notion keeps him alive?" Xiao Hong couldn't help but laugh. Ever since Song Zhang was executed, when Dong had left the prince's mansion. Luo Shi, who had sided with Song Zhang without distinguishing between friend and foe, was ordered by Wen Tao to stay in her hometown and not return to the capital. From then on, Wen Dong's life in the Wen mansion became exceptionally comfortable. At first, Xiao Hong was too busy with the Xianyang Marquis case to pay attention to anything else. Until one day, when lychees from Lingnan were delivered to the mansion, he instinctively ordered, "Pick some of the best ones and send them to Miss Wen." As soon as the words left his mouth, he realized she was no longer in the mansion. Because of this, Zhou Yang teased him for half a month. Xiao Hong glanced at Wen Jun without meaning to. The girl beneath the veil had lost her childishness and had grown into a stunning young woman. As if they hadn't seen each other in ages, she chatted endlessly about her recent trivial concerns. Xiao Hong's thoughts drifted back to that moonlit night by the pond. When Wen Jun said, "Power is truly alluring," Xiao Hong suddenly felt an indescribable urge. He foolishly wanted to embrace her and place her on the cold stone table, then kiss her passionately. The moment the thought crossed his mind, Xiao Hong wanted to slap himself awake. How perverted and shameless! He had always treated her more like a sister or a daughter, with kindness and care. Later, he asked Wen Dian why she had said such a thing. After all, she had been struggling against the power that oppressed her. Wen Dun explained that some people held power and exploited the people, harming the country and its people. Such behavior was despicable and deserved death. However, there were also those who bore the weight of the nation but imposed light taxes and relieved the people's suffering. She said, just as one may endure temporary humiliation to uphold an unyielding resolve, this servant knows that the prince is feigning ignorance, all for the day when the people no longer have to bear heavy burdens. It turned out that she had already sensed everything. In the tea pavilion, when Dian continued speaking, her father seemed to have been frightened by the matter involving Song Zhang and was now urgently searching for a suitable candidate to marry off his daughter. Wen Dong naturally refused without hesitation. Wen Tao, seeing her decisiveness, pressed further. Could it be that Dahmer already has a man she admires? At that moment, a face flashed through Wen Dong's mind. But she found it strange. She did enjoy talking to Xiao Hong, mainly because he listened attentively, answered gently, and treated her with warmth, kindness, and equality. But it felt different from liking someone, because sometimes, just thinking about him caused a faint ache in her heart. Seeing Xiao Hong staring at her absent-mindedly, Wen Dian blurted out her feelings. "Your Highness is well-traveled and knowledgeable. What do you think this means?" she asked eagerly. A spring breeze blew by, and Xiao Hong paused for a moment. The path he had chosen had no end, and its dangers were unknown. How could he drag the one he loved into this? Xiao Hong sipped his tea, his tongue tasting bitter. Perhaps it's because old wounds haven't healed yet. And